That was the interview with Nicholas Carr back in 2004, just as he sort of published his book based on this article in Harvard Business Review 2003 in May. Now, some of the points that he was talking about there link straight back to the whole field of sustainable corporate and information governance. In terms of vulnerabilities starting at the back end, what he's really trying to say there is that we have so much technology and it's growing so fast, Moore's law, in terms of cost and price and performance of the electronic chips, and it now appears to be applying to things like growth of data. Growth of data in the big data, the internet of things, is growing, sort of doubling every couple of years, which is kind of interesting because that makes it, 90% of all the information that we have available to us now was created or recorded in the last 2 years. And again, this year I was talking to people out in Las Vegas in that conference, the IBM Insight conference. And again, people were saying, yep, IT, the technology, the software, the networks, and everything else is getting less and less reliable. In fact, not like Nick Carr was saying back in 2004 that it's going to get really reliable. It's actually getting less and less reliable by and large. For a whole variety of reasons, the complexity of the data, complexity of the apps, complexity of the interconnection between the applications and so on, and the way that we now develop software. It's hardly designed, it's thrown together with agile techniques and so on. It's not very well tested. We saw what happened with Apple having had that little upset with iOS 8.0 and 8.0.1, and then and now hopefully 8.1 is fixed. We saw it with the vulnerabilities at Target last year, at Christmas last year, which led up to the idea, the fact that we now know that something like 800 million sets of identity have been stolen in various ways by fraud over the last less than 12 months. That's about 15% of the entire internet using population have had their internet IDs stolen. So it's actually getting more and more fractured. It's not developing in the usual style that proper technologies do. There's something very bizarre going on, which is a very fundamental governance issue. We also see how it's becoming more and more, the technology, or most of it, not all of it, but a lot of it is becoming very much commodity. How do we make a choice if we're going to buy a new PC or a laptop? We either buy it because we happen to like the name of the manufacturer. We might buy Apple or we might buy an iPad rather than another smart device or tablet because we happen to think Apple is cool or we like the interface. But otherwise, what do you do?
I go by what it's compatible with my house.
You would go with compatibility, exactly, you see. So you go for compatibility. You don't go for what's the best reputation maybe, or the cheapest, or the most expensive, or the most powerful. What fits? And businesses, most PCs are the same. I mean, a box like that is a box. You might decide to have a PC with a flash drive rather than a spinning drive for some reason. But that's about the only significant choice we have these days, other than the price. And whether you have 2 screens or 1 screen or whatever.
About power.
Pardon?
About power that are people interested
in what, the compute power? Most people aren't, unless they're gamers. If you're a gamer, then you want one with the most super fantastic CPU, overclocked, with a GPU with 1 million sort of GPUs in it and so on. But other than that, probably not.
Oh, I do. That's the main thing. One of the main things I look at, especially for streaming. You get rubbish ones for streaming.
Okay. Yeah, you've got special requirements. But for the general purpose, Nick made that point. He said, for business purposes, it's pretty much mainstream. It's pretty much commodity. But in the private space, yeah, you're looking at streaming, you're looking for gaming, you're looking for whatever. And so, yeah. But in the main, if you think about all of the major business applications, like the ERP system, whether it's SAP or PeopleSoft or Oracle or IBM's or whatever, they all cover all of the needs of a company, from finance, accounting, inventory management, scheduling, sales and distribution, etc., etc. They cover the whole thing. And once you've got it implemented, you are at parity with your competitors if they've all got it. Because also, as you install it, over that 18 to 24 month period for installation of ERP systems, you've got ERP consultants, SAP or whoever, PeopleSoft consultants working with you to help you configure it. But remember, they have spent the last 18 months probably with a competitor, learning everything about how they run their business, and they bring that knowledge with them and giving it to you. It's built into the product itself, probably as best of breed or good practice. They then configure it a little bit to you, bearing in mind what they learned from the last 3 clients. So you're a little bit ahead if you know how to use it in the next 18 months, while your next competitor gets brought up to speed. So maybe you've got 18 months advantage, perhaps. This is his contrast, as Carr says in his book, Does IT Matter? In 1965, American Airlines, helped by IBM, went live with Sabre, their big computer reservation system. And for 15 years, that gave American an amazing advantage over all their other competing airlines. Until IBM, having learned an awful lot about Sabre and CRSs and so on, built their own system, which they then sold or licensed to half of the other big airlines around the world. And it was a better CRS than American had with Sabre. But because Sabre matched their business so well, American couldn't afford to take on a new one, because that would have meant a huge amount of changes to something, either the way they did business or to this new mousetrap. And so they had 15 years advantage, competitive advantage back then. Today, 18 months if you were very lucky. He also made the point that the biggest benefits come from the first release of a new package. So if you think about word processing, that first word processing package, Word, when it came out in 1998 or thereabouts, that was a magical thing. Actually, there had been other versions in DOS and so on beforehand, but this became the first really great one for people to use. And that's a big improvement. But today, as we get new versions of Office and Word, we feel, hang on, what have they brought out? It takes us backwards, it's slower. I can't find things. Where's it gone? And there are now so many different so much different different functionality in there that, back with DisplayWrite 4, the IBM DOS product in 1987-8, the secretaries power typists would use about 10% of the functionality. Today we use about 0.5%, 1% perhaps of the functionality in Word. Yeah, maybe 1% of all the functionality in Word. So how do I find it? How do I use it? How what? How does it make me more effective? If I go back to the 1980s, the DOS SuperCalc. Basic, but it did a spreadsheet.
Would it be better if they actually asked the customers what they needed and just made different types of people?
An interesting question. However, they do put the stuff out to their user labs, usability labs, which kind of leads you to some interesting questions about who on earth thought that ribbon was a kind of a cool, that tile bar was a cool way of doing things. Fortunately, I left in the rendering engine the ability to put stuff into your toolbar, quick access toolbar, and so on. But in Excel, in SuperCalc, it was hard work to produce a graph. So you selected the columns, pressed the button, and took it as it was. If you wanted to make it sort of smooth and smart and cool, you could export it into something called Freelance, which back in 1987 cost £400 sterling. So you didn't have many copies of that. And you then spend a bit of time tarting it up a bit, changing the colours, the lines and the dots and so on. So you didn't do it very often. You just press the button and it came whizzing out and that was it. Today, with Excel, with every chart we produce, we don't like the colours, we don't know how to change the standard template for a graph, so we produce it and then spend the next 20 minutes or 15 minutes changing colours and everything else. So from going from SuperCalc, old style 1985 to Excel 2000 to 2014, I've now lost 10 minutes productivity per chart that I do. That's kind of bizarre, backwards move in productivity. Because no one ever learns how to save that colour set, that style, as a template for bar charts or whatever. Because no one tells us to, and it's difficult to find the details of how to do it, and so we just do it at the same time, again and again and again, losing 10 minutes every time. And it doesn't actually change the decisions, it just satisfies our aesthetic ideas. So we lose productivity. And so overall, I believe Nicholas Carr is entirely correct that the actual technology, by and large, doesn't matter very much. I mean, there are one or two leading edge things. Some of the stuff I saw out in the IBM Information on Demand conference, like the new cognitive engine Watson, which is kind of a cool, very, very clever piece of work. But it takes a lot of training. They spent 6 months to a year training it to absorb hundreds of thousands of documents and articles about cancer and cancer diagnostics and cancer treatment to become an advisor or an assistant to oncologists, doctors who are dealing with cancer. We had a short talk by a senior exec of a bank, one of the financial services companies in, I can't remember whether it's Peru or Mexico, but they're trying to do it to help understand insurance products. And they got it basically up and going, and they're now spending the next 6 to 8 months training it so they can help the staff in the call centres. So although they call it a cognitive engine, it's got the tools there that can actually, once it knows what it's doing, it's been trained by humans, the experts, it can then also tell you why it's come to those conclusions. And after a lot of training, it was able to win a Jeopardy, which is a TV show where people are asked questions and have to come with some interesting answers. And it was able to, using natural language processing, to be able to win. So there's something there that allows it to behave as though it were answering natural language questions in an interesting way. There are other sort of things there as well, but in the main, and IBM are doing this already, they're trying to get Watson as an engine out there as a utility across the world, across all of the different industries around. And it will become complete utility. And that was what Nick Carr wrote about in his second book, which is about the internet providing software as a service and all these other cloud type of activities. So my view is he's probably right. I think there's a lot of evidence that shows that competitive advantage is not helped by IT. You've got to spend a fortune. Banks spend something like anything up to 25% of their revenue on IT. That is the investment banks particularly. If you look at even the sort of standard, ordinary retail banks, they spend a significant proportion of their income on just staying at parity with all their competitors. They couldn't exist in the banking world without IT. So, in terms of all of the issues to do with sustainable, competitive information and corporate governance, there are a lot of questions raised about IT. Why do we spend so much on it when it's so fragile? What are the benefits we're getting from it? Is it sustainable? How do we manage risk, which is the point that Carr came up with towards the end. Don't be there at the beginning, because there's some things wrong with it. So you don't implement new operating system, releases of operating systems until they've been out there for 6 months. That's why most businesses out there haven't started looking at Windows 8 or 8.1 or even better Windows 10. You know, they're going to stay on 7 for probably the next couple of years, at least, before they think about going to Windows 10. They'll ignore 8 as a disaster.
Is that why XP is not still heavily?
Pardon?
Is that why XP is really still heavily?
That's why the XP is still there, because it is a really solid thing, and nobody really liked Millennium Edition because that was a catastrophe. No, that came before or after?
Before.
That came before. ME was a disaster. XP was great. Vista was kind of iffy. 7 was okay, but it was kind of a bit resource hungry.
Forgot Windows Longhorn.
Hmm?
Forgot Windows Longhorn. Tried to bring that out.
I don't even remember what that was. I missed that one. Didn't notice that. So Longhorn to me didn't exist. It was sort of kind of one of those. 7 came out, was not bad, but hey, it needed a bit of upgrade. 8, touch screens, you have to be joking. Stonking great big tiles, you must be joking. Back with 10 to something halfway sensible. So we'll see what happens. So to continue the ideas, we'll have a look at this week's aspect, things which are to do with risk management, perception and measurement, because humans are incredibly bad under most circumstances assessing risk. Really, really bad at it. What we're going to do today was have a think about a discussion about Nick Carr's things, which kind of we've had a chat about. And I want to think about now the second point, this evaluating the concepts of risk management, perceptions and measurement, because as we look at corporate governance, information governance, there are a lot of things that relate to risk and the way that we understand risk and the way we manage it. So the fundamental question is, just how bad are we at risk assessment? Can we actually understand risk at all and quantify it for any sort of situation? To give an example of how, and it sort of kind of relates to some of these, the next two, or the next slide with links to 2, as it turns out, articles by Bruce Schneier. In the aftermath of 9/11, after those 4 aircraft were sort of driven into the World Trade Center, into the Pentagon, and dropped into the sort of countryside, people suddenly said, flying is dangerous because there might be terrorists. And so they stopped flying across the USA, even when the aircraft started flying again, and said, it's safer to drive because it's in my hands. And it was noticed, the accident statistics showed that in the USA, in the 6 months following 9/11, there were somewhere between, it depends how you measure it and estimate it, somewhere between 200 and 5,000 extra road deaths. Because driving is more dangerous than flying. It always has been, and probably mostly will be.
You said that to me a long time ago.
Yeah. All right, okay, so 3, 4 big incidents, taking out 4 aircraft is kind of a problem, yep. And it's very noticeable. And the first of the articles, well, actually the ones that refer to by those, because when Bruce Schneier redid his website, these 2 links go to the same article, and I don't know where that one goes any longer because I can't find it. But in there, and in this article, you'll find a lot of interesting information that Bruce Schneier puts out that shows us how very, very bad in many circumstances we are at allocating, understanding risk. If it's something big ticket, seriously publicised like 9/11, it changes the way we think about things. It says, yeah, it was a big event, a lot of people got killed, both in the aircraft and in the towers, but we then over-internalise it as a risk to ourselves. And it's also and he shows one or two really interesting examples towards the end of the first section of that one. There's two, remember there's another section from a link at the top to page 2, or section 2, but halfway down, I think it is that one, there are some examples where in probabilistic terms the outcome is identical, and yet people make a choice depending on whether the frame of the question is positive or negative. And this is also very relevant to information government because of security. Security is just a cost if you want to be safe. Now, whether it's a good firewall, a good set of virus scanning software, or whatever, or building multi-path topologies for your network. It's expensive to do that, but it provides you with a major risk mitigation. But it's a cost for a very small probability, well, not very small nowadays, it's about 50% probability that something's going to go wrong in terms of viruses and so on. But people are prepared very often to go for zero cost and a small risk or medium-sized risk rather than a guaranteed cost and a small risk. It's just the way we internalise. And Bruce Schneier's articles take you through that rather cleverly. So this is what I want you to do, is to go and find those two papers and then think about the following question. What do those papers tell us about the way humans handle risk assessment, and how do we go about risk management? So that's the first major activity, because that links back into some of the questions you're asking yourself for the assignment about the value, the risks, and the governance issues of location services. And try and follow up some of the other sources in the different papers, and what actually do these articles and sources tell us about, as a general picture about humankind, how we do things, how we make snap judgments, how we make carefully thought out judgments. And then the final point is to think about, these two books are in the library nowadays. The first is risk management a sensible thing? Because if you go to any textbook about project management, just about, they talk about identifying your risks, managing your risk, mitigating your risks, and so on. And this book by Hubbard kind of is an interesting look at the problem. And then the second one, by Chapman and Ward, 2011, is actually even, in some respects, even more interesting, because project management is often done on risk registers. Every time you get to a project management environment or program, and where's your risk register? What are your risk mitigation processes and so on? But Chapman and Ward is that actually that possibly isn't quite the right way to go. Think about not the risk levels, but where don't you really know what's going on? Where are your areas of uncertainty? Because that might actually be much more effective in getting a more successful project than trying to go, got some risk there, but I don't know whether it's 50% or 20% or 100%, high, medium, low. Who knows? Whereas it might be a lot easier to understand where you don't know everything. The things we know that we don't know are what we're really looking at there. And perhaps the things we know. But it doesn't help us with the unknowns, the things we don't know. That kind of is a problem in here. And that can rise up and bite us back a bit. But this may be a more effective way. Think about it, that's really the message. And then, following on from that, really, for the rest of the session through to the end of the afternoon, is to look at how do you embed these ideas into your assignment. So it's very much applied. Put it into your assignment to get the sort of risk management, risk understanding built into your assessment of the critical issues. It may or may not be relevant, but you need to think about it as part of your assignment. Okay, folks, any questions?
The references on the previous slide that you
Yeah.
suggested to look at, is that on the psychology of security paper, or is it on the other one?
Well, sorry.
Next slide.
Yeah. The problem is, because we don't know exactly which 155 was, we'll have to have a look back and see if you can actually find it. If you put in that URL into Google search, you may get back to an archived version with a bit of luck.
Okay.
And then you'll know what it's actually meant to be. But basically, a lot of those, references in all of those articles will be very valuable. Okay?